I'll start with acknowledgement of country. In a spirit of reconciliation, the Statistical Society of Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. So welcome again to the first webinar in the Personal Journey series. These are a joint venture between the ECSSN and the History Standing Committee of the Statistical Society. Clearly, I'm representing the latter. The concept is to learn a bit more about the careers of some of our more senior statisticians, that's by age, and extract some lessons from their experiences for the early career and student statisticians. The webinars will be recorded and a transcript will be produced for the historical archives of the Statistical Society. The format will be an interview for about half an hour, followed by Q&A, which will be led by representatives of the ECSSN. Today, I'll be interviewing Professor Brian Phillips and Daniela Vasco, who is chair of the ECSSN, will be managing the Q&A component. You can ask your questions by hands up at the end of the interview or by writing down your question through the Zoom chat facility. So we'll have questions at the end rather than through the course of the interview. Our first interviewee is Professor Brian Phillips, who's had a very interesting career. He started off as a secondary school maths and science teacher and ended up as the long-term course director for the Swinburne University's Applied Statistics postgraduate program. And he held this position until he retired in his late 70s. He received a Vice Chancellor's Lifetime Achievement Award, and along his journey he was elected as President of the International Association for Statistical Education, the first Australian to achieve this honour. Now, let's hear a bit more about Brian. So, Brian, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your early life? Where were you brought up? Where did you live as a child? Were there any school subjects you specialised in or excelled at? Were you the school champion full forward? Just tell us a little bit about your early life.
Thanks, Dennis and Jodie and Daniela for organising this. It was a bit of a surprise that it was going to be something like this, I must admit. So I'm a little bit taken back. Now, the other day I saw some commandments for seniors. One of them says, talk to yourself. There are times when you need expert advice. Another said, the biggest lie you tell yourself is you don't need to write it down, I will remember it. Well, I can tell you I wouldn't remember many of the things, a lot of the things that happened in at least the detail, names and places and dates and the like, but it's certainly been a wonderful life. It's hard to realise now that in my, I just had my 84th birthday last week, so it's starting to creep up on me. Anyway, looking back, I consider myself very fortunate the way my life's unfolded. I was born in 1940, of course, during the Second World War, in the small country town of Nearham South in Gippsland, where my father was a Methodist home missionary at the time. After about a few months, which I don't really remember anything about, he was moved to Coleraine in the Western District, and I vaguely remember that because I was there till the end of the war when I was about 5. After that, we moved to my parents' town in Bendigo, White Hills, north of Bendigo, and that's where I grew up and where all my relatives were, and from the gold mining era. They'd been there since the 1850s, 1860s, so they were long-term members of the community, and in general they were workers in the not so much the mining. I didn't see any fortune, any money come out of it, but they were mainly into bricklaying and builders of that sort. My father was basically a plasterer, which he returned to that sort of work back in Bendigo, along with his work as a local minister in the church. So I attended the small White Hills Primary School. I was just a block away from home, so I used to be able to walk home every day for lunch and the likes. And then went on to the Bendigo High School, where I had 6 years there before I went to the University of Melbourne. One point I remember is in about third form or second form, we had to decide which group we'd go on to, whether we stayed with an academic stream, went to a more commercial stream, or a third stream, I forget. Anyway, my parents said, oh, maybe you should go into the accounting stream, the commercial stream. That sounds like a good job to do. Well, all my friends were staying with the more academic stream. And I said, I don't want to go with those people. So luckily I stayed with that stream, which led me on to study maths and physics and the like. So that was the first bit of good luck I see. I did the usual things, bike riding, in the school football team, that sort of thing, but certainly no star in that field. I went on did physics and mathematics were my best subjects through to year 12, although in year 12, I'd say it's form 5 in those days, form 6. I did get a prize in history, which didn't mean much at the time, but then my daughter went on to become a professor of history, so maybe there was some long-term influence there. Now, that was basically my
right. Well, thank you. Your career has been as a teacher, firstly in secondary schools as a maths and science teacher, and then you went on as a teacher at Swinburne University. So is there any reason why you chose teaching as a career?
Well, my family hadn't had any experience. No one had been to university, but I did know some other people who'd gone on through into either engineering or teaching degrees, and that seemed to be the obvious choice. So I applied for the teaching studentship and Commonwealth scholarship, but the teaching studentship gave you quite a good student allowance and allowed you to become independent. My parents couldn't have afforded to have kept me, and also a place to live. So that's why that was probably the main reason I became a teacher, along with many other friends from the country, because there was big recruitments in those days for teachers following the baby boom after the Second World War. So a big expansion in the need for teachers. So I ended up living in a first year at university in a hostel in Punt Road, which they'd set up for male teachers. And that was a great experience. There were 11 of us in the three rooms at the front of this hostel, which took about 80 people. And those 11 became sort of the group that I spent most of the time with, and we remained friends right through to now, except unfortunately there's only 6 of us still going. But we'll meet again next week, and that's certainly been a wonderful part of my life. We're all studying in the science and maths, so we're able to work together and socialise together and so on. I did move to another hostel in the second year, next to Albert Park Lake in Queens Road. And these buildings we go back and look at now that we lived as they were just these old houses, literally worth millions of dollars to just have an apartment in them these days. So at the end of when I finished my degree, science degree, we had to do a year of teaching, dip ed, before we started teaching. and there were no longer space for us in these hostels. So 5 of us moved out to a house in Heidelberg, where we looked after ourselves and generally learned how to cook and look after, all the things we needed to do, which certainly was helpful in future years. That takes me up to 1962, where I got my first appointment as a teacher. It was a school out in past Eston in Oak Park. It was just a new school, went up to Form 4, Year 10, and but I was only there for 6 months because I got a call one day. The next week I was moving out to Heidelberg High School because they needed a teacher for Year 12 physics, because the teacher had left in the middle of the year unannounced almost. And so I had to really pick up the straps to get up to speed. Anyway, it was a great experience. I worked very, very hard, but I had the next 18 months there before I was promoted to Shepparton High School, and spent the next 2 years there. While I was doing these in these years, I'd started a Bachelor of Education on top of the dip ed, because I'd heard that you were able to get higher pay if you went to places like Canada. And so I thought maybe I'll do that one day. So it turned out to be quite an advantage later on. And that's sort of my start of my teaching. While I was in Shepparton, I met my now wife, Marie, who was working at the time in Bendigo. She was a dietitian at the local hospital over there at that time. Yeah.
Well, you must, when you first started at Oak Park in Heidelberg, you mightn't have been much older than some of the students. So that must have made it tricky.
I would have been 21 when I started. I turned, like being born in 1940, it's easy to remember my age. So in 62, the year I started, I turned 22 in the middle of that year. And of course, at Heidelberg High and Shepparton High, you had 18, 19-year-olds in. So yes, you're only 2 or 3 years older than some of the students.
Most of my career at the ABS, I spent most of my career at the ABS, but I was able to, I had opportunities to do things other places for a period of time. I could work in New Zealand, spend a time in UK, and they were great learning experiences. Relatively early in your career, you were able to teach in UK and Canada. Were there any learnings from that experience that you would like to tell us about? And would you recommend that our young career statisticians do something along those sort of lines, even though it may be a temporary interruption to their career?
Oh, certainly. I think that was certainly one of the best moves that I did. We had to work 3 years to work out this studentship bond. So at the end of the 3 years, if you weren't married or tied down in some way like that, virtually everybody aimed to have a year off and go overseas. So I applied with a couple of other mates to go to England and took a year off. We actually sailed by ship in those days, which was a cheaper way to do it, and was a wonderful time. It was five weeks in a Greek ship, lots of ouzo and the like, and sailing in quite exotic places. We actually went through Auckland and then up to New Guinea, onto Colombo and up through the Suez Canal and Cairo and Athens and Naples we stopped at. So it was a fantastic trip. When I got to England, it was middle of winter and we had to find some work to do. So like most people at that stage, this is 1966 we're talking, we got jobs with the government school systems there. Basically, they were divided into what we call secondary modern schools or comprehensive schools and grammar schools. Now, about about 80% of the people went to these secondary modern schools because they had a test called the 11 plus test, which where the young people know all this history, where the more able students went on to grammar schools. So it's only about 20% or less actually went to the grammar schools, and they did the A levels so they could go on to their university degrees. Whereas the comprehensive schools were basically ones where people became tradesmen and administrators and that sort of manual work. So I had experience in both of those systems. I must say there were some quite hairy experiences in the secondary modern school. This is Kilburn, just the northwest suburbs of London, where one day I had a student disappeared. He was out the window. We're up on the first floor. He disappeared out the window, and what was he down the drain pipe? And then as I was leaving the class, the student said, "Sir, if you wondering, can't find your keys, they're in the rubbish bin." Someone had pickpocketed me. I didn't know, and they were good-natured kids, but boy, it was hard to hang on to them. But luckily, after a couple of months, I got a job at a grammar school, a totally different system. All the students were well behaved. You know, teachers called each other staff by their surnames. I had a grand piano in the hall, which a teacher played at concert level. So it was interesting to see the comparison between those two systems. At the end of that six months, I managed to get a job in Canada, because that in the 60s certainly there was a big push for people to go to Canada. So I applied for a job in St Catharines, Ontario, but the education department wouldn't extend my leave. I still had 6 months, but I needed another 6 months. So they said, "No, you'll have to resign," which I did, and lost all my, well, didn't lose, but I had to resign my superannuation at that time and got back just a part of what I'd actually paid in. But anyway, that didn't seem to matter much when I was about 26, I think, at that stage. And as well as this, Maria came to England, and we got married and travelled Europe and went to Canada. So our time in Canada was actually spent in two places, one in Ontario, the other in Alberta, the middle of Alberta, a very small country school, which was a fantastic experience. Just a couple of points in comparing those systems. The Canadian system was certainly much more centralised, decentralised compared with the Victorian system, with a local superintendent, local school boards, and a tax system which depended on where you lived and what school your children might go to, was how you were taxed. Most people went to public schools. There wasn't very much private school system then. But the main thing was that the staff were all well qualified, well, you know, all had degrees. Whereas that stage, back in Victoria, you didn't necessarily have a degree to teach, and you're paid much better. That's what attracted us over there. It was a very professional approach, very few discipline issues, at least where I was, and a most enjoyable time. I suppose a difference in the standards, there was a broader education. And for example, with mathematics, you didn't have any calculus at the school level. In fact, Marie decided to do some study because she thought maybe she'd go on and do a degree when she came back here. She had a diploma, not a degree. And so she studied their mathematics. It had no calculus in it. When she took up a degree back here in Melbourne, when she came back, she was absolutely floundering for a while. Anyway, I'd certainly recommend if to get the chance to travel for all the reasons, it's I don't list them all here, but just to work in different countries, making different friends, and if you get the chance. I've got a granddaughter at the moment who's studied and working in Seattle. Just a wonderful experience. She was on a basketball team, which helped as well. But that's I'd say.
Well, we might move on to Swinburne Uni. I think when you started there, you felt you needed to strengthen your knowledge of statistics. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did to how you went about doing that?
Yeah, well, at that stage, I really didn't know anything about statistics, and I got this job teaching after when I came back. I had to start again at the bottom of the ladder. I would have had to start again in the education system. So I looked around, ended up having a year at Kingswood College, but then got into Swinburne, which those were colleges of advanced education, and they were expanding rapidly, and they were actually looking for teachers, not researchers. And so when I after my first year there, the head, Keith Lovett, said, we're actually putting some statistics into our engineering maths classes, and we're also going to be teaching psychology and business students some statistics. So would you be interested in studying some statistics? So this resulted in me doing the theory of statistics 1 and 2 at Melbourne University part-time. I got 2 hours a week off to do that. That was reduced 16 to about from 18 to about 16 hours a week, I think. I remember I had Stefan Moritz then, wonderful man, but sometimes his lectures were a bit confounding, and I was lucky to have Ray Watson as a tutor. And I actually worked with his father, Ken Watson, who was a marvellous teacher, and he was a famous basketball coach in Australia. So as far as the studying of statistics, I remember lots of proofs, and I don't remember the proofs when doing them, but I don't remember using any data. Anyway, after I'd finished that, I started to think, well, I should try and advance my qualifications because Swinburne was starting to head towards having degrees. So I did a bit more statistics and ended up going to Southampton on a sabbatical program, and was lucky enough to go to university, the Southampton, the Master of Social Statistics, where some remarkable people worked. The head was Graham Kelton, who was an expert in survey sampling, and there were other people there that I got to know quite well, especially Tim Holt, who became the first director of the Office of National Statistics in England, Fred Smith, the professor at applied stats at Southampton, and Alistair Scott, who was regarded as one of the finest statisticians in New Zealand. We became quite good friends on a minibus trip we did to a European stats conference. And when I was thinking about this talk, I thought, I wonder what they're doing now. Well, when I looked up, it was very sobering to learn that Alistair, Fred and Tim had all died in the past few years. They weren't similar age to me. It made realise a bit how fickle life is. So that sort of was the main role I did in trying to up my statistics a bit to work in that area.
Yeah, well, you're lucky that because they were very good people. Several of them, at least 2, perhaps 3, became presidents of the Royal Statistical Society and presidents of international associations. So they were great people to be around. You were program director for the Graduate Statistics program for many years, and the courses were designed for students whose main discipline was not statistics, as you mentioned, engineering and psychology students. Have there been any big changes in teaching methods over the period of time that you've been involved in that program?
Well, by the time we started the graduate courses in social and health, which became applied statistics, we'd already were teaching computer packages, particularly SPSS, Minitab, SAS. Were the main packages we used. It was days before R. I never did get to learn R, but so from the mid-70s, we got a big change in the way statistics was taught from a theory base to a practical base. And because of the use of computers, we were able to do that. And that's how we could teach these students who didn't have mathematical basis. We started with about 20 students and worked up in having them in the part-time classes, full-time classes, eventually online, off campus. We ended up having, I think, something of the order of 700 students over the period till I retired, and eventually that we got to do a master's degree, and about 90 of them completing the master's program. So the main changes were in moving to more online study. By the time, in fact, the last lecture I gave, I was teaching an online subject. Nobody had turned up to they could come to the class, but no one turned up this day. And I'm giving my last lecture to myself online. But I thought, well, there was actually someone watching, because I got a message later saying good luck, because I said this is my last lecture. Yeah. And of course, I won't go into all the stuff, using real life case studies, using real data sets. I did quite a bit of work with sampling, and was able to use some magnificent data sets to demonstrate all the sampling methods and so on. And we had a number of, we would get experts in from the fields, like people from ACR, from ABS, and so on. And we tried having more subjects and statistics literacy, and this went back into the undergraduate courses based on the sort of Jessica Rutt's sort of courses, and along with what Chris Wilde and Maxine Van Cuff in New Zealand had been doing. But certainly changes all the time. You had to adapt and try and learn and keep up. It was never the same.
Well, you reminded me back in 1967, when I did my last year of my undergraduate statistics program, we had a 7-hour exam where we had to use mechanical calculators to do all the quantitative analysis. And they even allowed us to take alcoholic refreshments to help us get through that 7 hour. So in 2015, you received the Swinburne Vice Chancellor's Lifetime Achievement Award. Earlier than that, you were elected as president of the International Association of Statistical Education. So these are very fine acknowledgements of your contributions. Is there any particular achievement or achievements that give you special pride?
Well, yes, there's a story which I won't go into here about the how I got involved in the IASE, the International Association for Statistics Education, but that was one of the strokes of good luck when I went to a conference in Vancouver, the second ICOTS conference. And I eventually became on the first committee when the IASE was established in 1993. And the committee had the president was David Moore, who was famous for making the changes, big changes to way statistics was taught through his texts and his videos against all odds. But once I got appointed on this committee, which I got a suspicion that our common friend Denise Leavesley may have nominated me because I knew her through other courses I've been involved in at Axbury, and she became the president of the ISI around that time. And as I was on the committee, David Moore said, now, what would you like to be in charge of? Here are the topics. And one of them was looking after conferences. And I ended up having responsibility for running the conferences. So I ran, the first main one was in Singapore, the ICOTS 5 in 1998. But the one that I feel most proud of is probably the one in South Africa in Cape Town in 2002. This was there's amazing lot of people were involved. I worked very closely on that with Danny Ben-Zee from Israel, who unfortunately at the moment is having a very tough time with the war that's going on there. I won't go into that here, but the amazing number of people, the people like Jackie Galpin and Delia North. We nearly didn't go there because at that time it wasn't long after apartheid, and people were worried about security in general. But it was incredibly lucky that we did go there because it was the most marvellous meeting, and the music, the sights, Nelson Mandela's Robben Island, and soul-wrenching South African townships we visited. Anyway. Why, apart from just being a marvellous conference and all, what's been especially satisfying from this meeting would be the effect on statistics education in South Africa. And one of our good friends, Delia North, who is the Professor of Statistics at KwaZulu-Natal University, was very involved in this work, and during the conference they had teachers, workshops for teachers, because statistics, she wrote, statistics played virtually no role in the South African school system at that time. The hosting of ICOTS 6 in South Africa dovetailed beautifully with the introduction of statistics into the school curriculum, and national and international attention was focused on this initiative, and they ran these fantastic workshops with these teachers. What I can't forget was at the end of the conference, the group of teachers that were there came out and sang a song they'd created for Delia and the workshops, and they sounded like one of those Soweto choirs you sometimes hear, just absolutely magnificent. And we all virtually didn't have a dry eye in the house. Anyway, Delia has continued these programs ever since, as far as I know. But I'd rate that, I mean, the thousands of things we could talk about, just the effort of getting the conference there, all the work that went into it was an incredible amount of work, working with all these people. And the effect. So I put that down as one of my most treasured memories.
Well, we're running a little bit short of time, Brian, so we might move on. You've just talked about some of the education programs or conferences you've been involved in outside Australia. But you've been involved in a lot inside Australia, not just those programs arranged by Swinburne University. Can you tell us a little bit about what your motivation was in getting involved in education, statistics education in a broader, more broadly than just, your paid job?
Well, I don't know. I mean, things sort of just happen in life. You don't go out seeking to do any of these things, and various opportunities come up. I wasn't a researcher. I was a teacher. I almost by accident got involved in the IASE, and they just blew you away when you went to these meetings with all these incredible people, which I get to spend the whole time just listing them all. But it just gave you such a motivation, and I guess my speciality turned out to be more in organisation and involvement and working with people. And I'm not sure I can add very much
Well,
to
it
that.
shows that you can contribute to our profession in many different ways. You don't have to be the top researcher in one of the top researchers in the world. There's room for people doing all sorts of tasks. In fact, we need people doing all sorts of different tasks. So just to conclude, you finally retired in 2016 at age 76. If you had your time again, is there anything you would do differently? You did mention that you've had a wonderful life, but if you had a chance, is there anything here I'm talking about career-wise or work-wise rather than lifestyle-wise? Is there anything you might do differently? Would you have got more involved in research, for example?
Well, no, I don't think I would. I'm going to. I remember that when I was doing physics 3, and we're in the lab, and equipment blew up, and the head of the lab there, Richard Cherry, said something like, "Some of you will end up being leaders in science in the community, researchers, professors, Nobel scholars and the like. But there's also a need for people to be organisers, run the social programs, the reunions, the conferences and so on." And I know which group I fell into. I've got a family of researchers. My wife, my son and my daughter are all into that. So I've had a lifetime of research all around me, and not that I don't do research, but I'm mainly involved with helping people with their statistics, particularly in the Axbury courses and things like that. But me myself, after I'd done my masters, that I was happy with that. I had no desire to do more research. I think, in fact, as one of my points I've made, I think there's sometimes too much emphasis on the being a researcher, and maybe more rewards should go for people in the teaching side. Not that I didn't get quite well rewarded, but I couldn't have gone any further. I got to associate professor, but that was my ceiling. But I was perfectly happy with that.
Right. Well, thanks a lot, Ryan. I can speak personally about the importance of Brutus researchers. That's I think I fall in the same category as my children that are researchers, not me. So thanks very much for that, and I'll hand over now to Daniela, who's going to manage the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Brian, and Dennis. Thank you, Brian, for giving such a rich interview about your experience at such an interesting pathway to be here, and it's very encouraging to know that there's space for everyone to be successful in different paths in life and having different experiences. If anyone has questions, you can unmute yourself, or you can type in the chat, and I'm happy to read to ask Brian. But if not, I'll just start with a question asking Brian. Many of people here are
Helen's got a hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Helen McGilvray's got her hand up.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. You go first, Daniela.
No, I'm happy to go in the end, Helen, please. I was just looking up the document.
Thank you very much, Dennis and Brian. Brian, as always, has been very modest, and I'd just like to ask a couple of questions. First of all, that ICOTS in 2002 was an extraordinary conference the range of participants, from teachers to representatives of the United Nations and top researchers, was wonderful. But I wanted to ask, Brian, one of the big things that you did was introduced optional refereeing with, I think that was you and Larry Weldon, and I know it was in place by 2006, but did you introduce optional refereeing for one of the satellites before then?
No, from my memory, when I was, I think whatever I was, chair of the program or something. I think it was Peter Jones who I worked with said, "Look, we really should, have the chance for people to get a refereed paper out of these sort of conferences," and that was the first time that we took on refereeing.
Yeah.
So I had to learn a whole range of things. At that time, we mainly used fax machines because they wanted to have the signatures of the consent forms and everything. Well, I can remember spending Christmas holidays in at work when all these forms were coming in, and luckily we moved away from that as we went on and realised that wasn't really needed. But yes, we also produced a CD for the first time. Previous to that, in Singapore, I've still got the 3 huge volumes that Lionel produced up there. But we went away from that, and I think now we don't have CDs even, we just have it all on the web. And it's a wonderful website, and the IASE website, which has all the papers, all the information from the start of the organisation back in 1993, when it officially started.
Thank you. And the other thing was that you became known as the unofficial official ICOTS and IAC cameraman. So I really do think that we need to say thank you for that, for all the photos that you took and made available.
Yes, I've got them all. They're all somewhere, and occasionally I come across them. I tried to get them organised, but I'll find some to send in to Jody. And but yeah, I was going to say, if people, one thing to keep a record of what you're doing when you come back and you start to look back at your life and everything. Your memory plays tricks, but if you've got the photos, it certainly helps. And having papers and having good websites and so on that are still there 20 years later. So all of that is very, very useful. Thanks, Helen.
Extremely important.
Yeah. And of course, with Helen, we've run the OzCots meeting since that came out of the ICOTS in Singapore, when I thought, well, it'd be a good idea for people in Australia to hear about these things. So we had small meetings where all the presenters from the ICOTS would present their papers, and then eventually that grew into the big OzCots that Helen and I ran, and now I think others, particularly Helen, has kept up, which has been great.
We owe you a lot.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Anyone else from the audience? Feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself or type in the chat once again. If not, I could ask a question while people are thinking.
Yeah. It's hard to hear you. Bit hard to hear you.
Can you hear me better now?
Oh, yeah, that's much better.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so if I wait for people to get into the questions, feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself or raise your hand. Once again, I would say. But while we wait for them, I'll ask a question that is, we are a student and early career network, and many people here might be in that category. So do you have any words of wisdom for them, and for us, for me in this case as well, on the type of initiatives that we might undertake to advance our careers?
Well, I was told that something like this might crop up, and I tried to think of what words of wisdom. Well, I suppose they're a lot of them pretty obvious. Take any opportunities that come your way. Things happen by chance. Ta- any extra training. Nowadays, with short courses, webinars, and so on, you don't have to go out and do another degree and so on to learn new things. Get involved as much as you can. Whether it's giving talks, writing papers, but taking on extra little tasks, helping with seminars and in conferences and the like, running short courses. So anyway, of course, you don't have to do all of them, but any of them that you can get involved in to some extent. But one thing I was going to say is don't get too disappointed if things don't go quickly enough for you. It took me 17 years from when I started at Swinburne to advance from being a lecturer to a senior lecturer. And that was just how it was then. Now people will think if they haven't got promoted in 2 or 3 years, there's something wrong. So just be patient. I didn't get the responsibility like I had till I was in my 50s when I started running the stats conferences. Take any chance you can to help people become more statistically literate. I attend some U3A classes, and the chap organising it, when something about statistics comes up, whether it's a survey or something, he says, statistics, just that's all rubbish, the typical things that people say. And any chance that you get to try and help make the society a bit more statistically literate. As I said before, keeping photos is a good idea, and any chance of doing some public speaking, even just in a small way. So I think that's a few points that I'll pass on.
Thank you so much. Those are great advice. And Dennis, do you want to back up? I cannot hear you. You are muted, perhaps.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was muted. Sorry. Brian, you spent most of your time teaching statistics for people who were studying other disciplines. Did you do anything to try and understand those disciplines and what the statistical issues were through their eyes rather than through a statistician's eyes? I ask this in part because one of the things that concerns me about data science is, first of all, that there's insufficient statistical thinking used for a lot of data science applications, but also that the applications the people doing the applications don't pay enough attention to the subject matter knowledge that's required to make sense of their work. So, getting back to my question, is there anything you did to try and learn a little bit more about the disciplines of your students?
Well, I suppose the main way that you learn is through people bringing you their problems, such as at particularly at places like the Axbury courses, where people come there because they're researchers who need some statistics. So they have their. I couldn't consciously go out and study other areas, but you'd have to know enough from what they tell you. And I guess half the time when they're trying to explain things to you, what they want, they almost work it out from themselves. I think we've all experienced that. But certainly trying to understand things from the student's point of view, that's I think the important issue is, okay, I think back to my student days, particularly my undergraduate science days, I don't think I understood anything during the lectures. You just had to take it away. the main thing was getting it written down, because you didn't have any handout materials. You had to copy it down off the blackboard and work it out. That was good in one way, but that was only good if you were a student who's put the effort in to try and get behind it. So for a teacher or the likes, try and see things from the student's point of view and explaining them, and not overwhelm them with mathematics and the like. But yeah, that's about all I can say on that at the moment.
Thank you, Brian. And Dennis, Bill, do you want to ask a question?
Is that me that you're asking for? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Brian, I'm not so far behind you. I did my degree 62 to 65. And I think that just a comment really more than a question. The thing that really turned me into a statistician was a vacation job that I had in Canberra with the Bureau over 62, 63, where I was working with people like Ken Foreman and Ken Brewer and Tony Gracia. And I wasn't sold on being a statistician, but at that stage, I really became a statistician because I could see there was a very interesting mathematical side to things as well as a practical side. But the other thing it gave me was a determination never to go towards sampling and to steer clear of visual statistics as far as I could. So it was sort of instructive in that way. But of course, I'm being a little bit too prescriptive here. But I just thought that, looking back, it shows those real interactions with real statisticians and real statistics that really make you understand what an interesting subject it is, and is probably a very good way of deciding where young people should go in their careers. The other thing I would say is thanks very much for a very interesting talk. It had sort of echoes of me. I spent time in Canada and the UK as well, but also in Germany and various other places. So thanks very much.
No, that's good, Bill. And yes, that's certainly a point that I make to anyone, that statistics is such an interesting thing to teach in, because you have people from all disciplines. You're not just focusing on one particular area.
Yeah. Tookie said the thing about being a statistician is you get to play in everyone's backyard.
Yeah.
I have 5 more minutes if anyone else has questions. If not, I was like, how are you spending your time now, Brian? Any professional activities?
When I retired when I was 76, about 7 years ago, and I thought, well, I've got to do something. So I bought a bike and got into cycling. I used to think, well, cycling 10K seemed like an awful lot, and the next thing you're cycling 20, 50, and even 100 at times. I must admit, since I've been 80, I have added a bit of assistance to the bike. So, but I still get out at least once a week if I can. In fact, I'm at the moment in charge of local U3A bike group where I live. A small group, but we try and get out fairly regularly. I go to some U3A sessions. I go to the gym several times a week, special sessions for seniors. That's good not only for exercise, but good for the coffee and the social side of it. I am still a adjunct professor at Swinburne, and for the first few years, basically before COVID, I would regularly go in and particularly help with their graduate units as more as a consultant. I wasn't teaching, or occasionally do some marking for some of the master's students' work and so on. But that's eased off in recent years, particularly, or last year particularly, because the course has phased down a lot. But we travel. In fact, we're due to, we were travelling last 2 weeks ago, to Darwin. We got to Darwin and we were to catch the GAN down to Adelaide. And the night before we were to go out, my wife got COVID. So we missed that trip and we had to fly home. But we do like to travel. Our daughter lives in New Zealand, so we go there when we can. And what do I do? Of course, usual things around the house, gardening. We've got a beach house, which we try and keep things under control. But and I suppose academically, the main things that I've done is writing a number of histories. There was a history of the place where I was a student in the education department, so we wrote, a group of us wrote a history about that, and I've been involved. I wrote a history of our old maths department. Through COVID, I had all this material, so I wrote quite a bit of history about that. And then with Helen and Asia, we just a year or so ago wrote the history of the IASE. So those sort of things ticking along, as long as and various other referrals and so on that you end up writing. So yeah, they're the main sort of things. Luckily, I'm still in good health, and you know, children and grandchildren. Grandchildren, 2 in New Zealand, 2 in Australia. One's they're both their older granddaughters are actually engineers at the moment, and one in Melbourne and one in America. Anyway, that's keep busy. There's never always something to do, and then something like this comes up. Someone says, "Oh, let's do a history of your life." God, who would want to hear about that? Doesn't sound very interesting to me, but who knows? Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Brian. I see that you're keeping very busy with things, so that's very good, and glad to hear that health is well for you and your family as well. And there is quite a few. We are on time. There are quite a few messages of thank you, so you can see that everyone found it very interesting and what you said. So thank you from me this is Amy, for sharing your experience and wisdoms, Brian, and all your service contributions, hoping seen the photos. Then Elizabeth Russell said, "Thanks, Brian, for sharing your life lessons and perspectives. I found it insightful and thought-provoking. I enjoyed big picture perspective you shared. Being early career, sometimes you do get caught up in rushing to do everything, but it was nice to be reminded that you do spend a lot of time, a lot of your life working, and there is not a need to constantly rush. I definitely fit into the non-researcher category, so enjoyed hearing about your contributions on that part and the importance of those contributions. So thank you for sharing your life." Johnny Chen. Then Zoe says, "Thank you, Brian, for sharing your story. It's lovely to hear that your approach to pedagogy is in the university setting is student-centered and individualized. This was always my approach as a high school teacher, and it really does make a positive difference to students' experience." So Chloe said, "Thank you so much for sharing, Brian. I found the lesson you provided today very insightful to me." And Alex, he also said, "Thanks, Brian. It was
You're
lovely
welcome.
to hear your story."
Thank you.
So much. Yeah, just showing the appreciation of everyone in case you didn't get the message.
Oh, well, thanks for people coming and listening. I hope there's something of use to people.